When I first moved into Maplewood Glen, I wasn't looking for trouble. I was looking for peace. After 25 years working as a civil engineer for the Army Corps, I was ready to trade in hard hats and flood zone maps for porch swings and backyard barbecues. The house I picked was a dream. A charming two-story cottage on the edge of the subdivision with a massive oak tree out front and a natural spring-fed creek running behind the backyard. That creek wasn't just picturesque, it was functional. A slow-moving tributary that had been there long before Maplewood Glen existed, winding like a lazy ribbon through several yards before joining a larger drainage channel on the other side of the highway. It absorbed rainwater, filtered runoff, and kept the soil balanced. My house sat on slightly elevated terrain, a detail that later turned out to be a stroke of luck. I didn't know much about homeowners associations back then. I'd spent most of my life on government property or out in the sticks. The idea of neighbors forming a committee to regulate lawn height and mailbox colors sounded more amusing than threatening. I signed the deed with only a cursory glance at the HOA contract. Big mistake. At first, the HOA of Maplewood Glen seemed like any other neighborhood watch with a fancier name. They sent out monthly newsletters filled with gardening tips, announcements about food truck Fridays, and reminders to trim your hedges. The president was a portly man named Raymond Fitch, a retired insurance claims adjuster with too much time and not enough tact. He took his role seriously, too seriously. Every decision made by the HOA board seemed to come from his lips and be rubber-stamped by his loyal followers. My first run-in with the HOA came 2 months in, when I received a warning notice for having an unauthorized natural water feature. That's how they described the creek. I laughed, thinking it was a clerical error. Surely they didn't mean the actual creek that ran through a dozen other yards in the neighborhood? They did. A follow-up letter arrived a week later, this one more serious in tone. It stated that I was non-compliant with Maplewood Glen's drainage policy and had 7 days to submit a landscape remediation plan. They wanted me to fill in the creek. You read that right. Fill in a federally protected natural waterway with dirt, rocks, or whatever else would make it disappear. I called them immediately. "You people can't be serious," I said, barely hiding the irritation in my voice. "That's a tributary. It's mapped by the state. You can't just bury it because you think it looks messy." "Mr. Dalton," Raymond said, his voice oily and condescending, "Maplewood Glen has a consistent landscaping aesthetic. The creek you mentioned poses a mosquito risk and interferes with our neighborhood drainage plan." I nearly choked. "Your drainage plan? That creek is the drainage plan. Without it, your side of the neighborhood is going to flood like a sponge in a bathtub." He chuckled, clearly unimpressed. "You have until the end of the month to comply. Or we will." At this point, I knew I wasn't dealing with rational people, but I also knew the law. I spent most of my career designing infrastructure that had to account for natural waterways and runoff systems. Filling in a creek wasn't just stupid, it was illegal, especially without a permit from the county environmental board. So I did what any good engineer does when faced with a bureaucratic idiot. I documented everything. I took photos, pulled up maps from the county GIS database, dug out elevation surveys and historical topography charts, and started building a case. The creek wasn't just old, it was protected. The Clean Water Act might not cover every ditch and gully, but this one had records dating back to 1963. I sent them copies of everything. They ignored all of it. Then came the day I caught the contractors. It was early, around 6:45 a.m., and I was sipping coffee on the back porch when I heard the rumble of a skid steer. Sure enough, two men in unmarked trucks were setting up on the edge of my yard with bags of quikrete and a stack of wooden stakes. I stormed outside. "Hey, you're trespassing! What the hell are you doing?" The guy in the orange vest looked confused. "We're here from Maplewood HOA. Said we're supposed to fill in a drainage channel." I pointed at the flowing creek. "That's not a drainage channel. That's a tributary." He shrugged. "Boss man said fill it in. We don't ask questions." I called the county inspector on the spot. Luckily, I had already spoken with someone at the Water Control Board the week before. An official truck rolled up 20 minutes later, sirens off but authority radiating from every inch of it. What followed was a verbal slapdown so brutal that the contractors packed up their tools before the inspector even finished citing the HOA for unauthorized earthwork. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, while I was visiting my sister out of town, they did it. The HOA brought in a crew late one Friday night, unpermitted, unlicensed, and unsupervised. They poured concrete into the channel, effectively damming the creek behind my property. When I returned Sunday, I was greeted by the smell of wet cement and the sound of silence. No trickling water, just a dry ditch filled with gray sludge and debris. I was stunned. They didn't just trespass, they destroyed state-monitored hydrology. And they didn't stop with my yard. The concrete path stretched beyond my lot line, cutting off the creek as it flowed downstream into the lower part of the neighborhood. It was gone, buried under 6 inches of mix and an inch of gravel. I took photos, lots of them. I called the county. Again. I even tried to get the EPA involved. But government wheels turn slowly, especially when the damage is already done. That's when the real karma began. It started with a few wet lawns, then soggy flower beds, then basements. The lower third of Maplewood Glen, houses built just slightly downhill from mine, began to flood with every rainstorm. And I don't mean puddles, I mean ankle-deep, carpet-soaking, furniture-floating floods. One neighbor, Janice from Sycamore Lane, came to my door one morning in a panic. "My entire crawl space is underwater. It smells like sewage," she said. I nodded solemnly. The creek used to carry that water out. Now it has nowhere to go. But why would the HOA? Because Raymond thought concrete was prettier than nature. Within a month, 10 homes reported water damage. The HOA's response? Faulty sump pumps and record rainfall. They refused to admit fault. Raymond even had the nerve to suggest that residents raise their lawns. But water doesn't care about excuses. It obeys gravity. By month 2, mold complaints began pouring in. Insurance companies started asking tough questions. Then came the big storm. 5 inches of rain in 2 days. I sat on my back porch with a cup of coffee, dry and smug, watching as the water backed up behind the concrete dam the HOA had poured. It spilled over lawns, seeped into foundations, and filled the brand new HOA clubhouse with 2 feet of brown water. Raymond stood in the parking lot the next morning with his loafers soaked and his phone held high, yelling at someone over speakerphone. I waved at him. He didn't wave back. Because he knew. He knew I was the one who warned them. He knew I was the one who told them this would happen. And worst of all, for him, he knew I had everything on record. You'd think after an entire clubhouse got swamped, the HOA would have stopped and reconsidered their actions. Maybe hold a town hall, admit a mistake, ask for help. But no, Raymond doubled down. Instead of repairing the damage or reversing the concrete channel job, he had the nerve to send out a neighborhood bulletin titled "Community Resilience in the Face of Unusual Weather Patterns." It blamed unexpected climate anomalies and encouraged residents to apply for HOA-sponsored waterproofing discounts, with contractors the board conveniently pre-approved. Pre-approved my ass. I checked the names. 2 of the contractors had P.O. boxes, no websites, and shared a business registration address with Civic Edge Property Management. And guess who sat on the board of Civic Edge? Raymond Fitch. They weren't just covering up a disaster, they were profiting from it. I was furious but not surprised. I dealt with bureaucratic worms before. What they lacked in conscience, they made up for in spreadsheets and liability waivers. But this wasn't just petty corruption anymore. It was fraud, environmental violation, insurance manipulation. It was war. The neighbors started coming to me. The ones who used to wave politely but kept their distance when I challenged the HOA. Now they were practically camping out on my porch with soggy documents and cell phone videos. Janice, the Turners, Old Man Harvin, even Stephanie Myers, who once called my backyard unkempt, apologized with homemade banana bread and a handwritten apology note. They were tired, angry, and wet. "We didn't know," Janice whispered, eyes glassy. "We thought you were just being difficult." "I was," I replied. "Difficult is exactly what this kind of stupidity needs." That week, I helped 6 homeowners file claims, not just with their insurance companies, but with the state's Environmental Compliance Office and the County Risk Management Department. I made sure they all used my documentation, photos, timestamps, survey data, weather records, and HOA meeting notes I'd pulled from public records. And I wasn't alone. Remember Roger, the retired Navy guy 3 houses down? Turns out he used to be a paralegal with a specialty in easements and land use disputes. Together, we drafted a class complaint. Not a lawsuit yet, just a legal shot across the bow. Enough to scare the HOA into knowing we meant business. And then came the real miracle. I got a call from a reporter. Her name was Eliza Walker. Local. Ran a mid-size investigative blog called Suburbia Exposed. She'd gotten wind of Maplewood's situation from a county inspector I'd spoken with, one who was very interested in the HOA's unauthorized concrete channel. Eliza showed up in a Jeep with cameras, drones, and a nose for scandal. I walked her through everything. From the first warning letter, to the midnight pour job, to the flooded clubhouse. She filmed the entire route of the now-dead creek, highlighting the cracks in the concrete, the pooling runoff in driveways, and the pungent stench of moldy crawl spaces. She interviewed neighbors, captured footage of families emptying buckets from basements, and even caught Raymond on camera as he yelled at landscapers trying to drain a backyard with a sump pump the size of a dinner plate. That night, the story hit the front page of her blog. HOA kills creek, drowns neighborhood. How cement and greed flooded Maplewood Glen. It went viral in hours. The comments were brutal. Other HOA horror victims chimed in. Even a local meteorologist weighed in to explain how the neighborhood's new topography guaranteed future flooding. Raymond tried to push back. He released a counter-statement accusing Eliza of biased reporting, and claimed that no resident was ever forced to comply with unreasonable waterway changes. So I dropped the GoPro footage. Yes, I had cameras. Yes, I had time-stamped proof of the contractors on my land. And yes, I had a recording of Raymond himself saying, "We'll fill it in ourselves if he won't comply." Eliza updated her article with the footage. Boom. By the following Monday, 3 different entities had launched official inquiries. The County Environmental Department issued a cease and desist on all HOA earthwork. The Department of Water Resources requested documentation from the board. The State Attorney General's office asked for homeowner testimony regarding HOA fraud and environmental violations. And if that wasn't satisfying enough, Raymond's insurance company dropped him. Apparently, when you illegally modify a waterway and cause damage to 14 homes, it qualifies as gross negligence. Raymond, red-faced and cornered, tried to host a board meeting. The problem? It had to be public now. The county demanded transparency for all HOA decisions until further notice. The auditorium was packed, and for once I sat in the front row with Eliza recording, Roger reviewing papers, and a dozen soaked homeowners ready to speak. Raymond opened with a shaky voice. "I know recent events have been difficult, but we must remember this community was built on unity and shared values." "You mean like lying and flooding?" I stood up. People laughed. Raymond turned pink. I continued, "This board knowingly destroyed a protected tributary. You trespassed, poured concrete, and ignored warnings. Now your clubhouse is a swamp, and half the residents are living in moldy basements." Roger chimed in next, calmly dropping the legal packet on the table. "We're filing for a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances and contracting procedures. As residents, we have a right to know how our dues were spent and why Civic Edge, which you co-own, billed us for nearly $70,000 in unnecessary flood mitigation." Raymond blinked. "This isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," I said. "And if you don't vacate your position tonight, we're filing for a full recall vote. We already have signatures." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Raymond looked to the other board members. They looked away. That night, Raymond didn't go home. He drove out of the neighborhood with the same garbage bags I saw in his garage earlier that day. Word is, he left town. Good riddance. But this wasn't the end. This was the turning point. With Raymond gone and half the board resigning, a special election was held. Roger became president. I took over the role of HOA treasurer, mostly so I could audit every dollar spent. And Janice, bless her mold-fighting soul, became director of environmental compliance. Our first act? Hire a proper hydrologist. And our second? Secure county permits to remove every slab of unauthorized concrete and restore the creek to its natural flow. But we didn't just stop at fixing the damage. We made the HOA transparent, accountable, and neighbor-friendly. Open books, resident votes on big decisions, monthly check-ins at the park instead of closed-door meetings in dusty offices. Maplewood Glen didn't just survive. It evolved. We put up a plaque by the newly restored creek bed. Not a fancy one, just steel and stone with an engraving that reads, "Nature doesn't negotiate. Water always finds its way. Let this be a reminder. Respect the land or prepare to swim." We thought once Raymond skipped town and the new board took over, things would calm down. But corruption has roots, and those roots ran deeper than we'd imagined. During our first official audit as the new board, Roger and I began reviewing Civic Edge's financial records. Well, what little we could find. Most of the documentation was fragmented or missing, and the files left behind looked like someone had tried to cleanse them with fire and a cheap scanner. Invoices had vague descriptions. Infrastructure maintenance, $8,300. Creek alteration services, $14,200. Community improvement, $22,000. None of these had line items, no contractor names, no addresses, no photos. Typical HOA laundering tactic, Roger muttered. Obfuscate, bill big, and run before anyone notices the mold growing in the ceiling. Speaking of mold, the real battle had only just begun. Janice launched an environmental survey. She brought in an industrial hygienist, someone who used to assess FEMA zones after hurricanes. The results were brutal. Over 24 homes tested positive for black mold in attics, crawl spaces, and basements. The culprit? Altered drainage paths. Rain that used to trickle into the creek now had nowhere to go. It backflowed into lawns, flower beds, foundations. Some homes were now growing mushrooms inside their HVAC systems, and the HOA still liable. The calls came fast. Homeowners demanded mold remediation. Insurance companies tried to dodge claims by citing negligent HOA decisions. Realtors panicked. Homes were now blacklisted on some regional databases for flood impact history. Even the neighborhood kids noticed. I overheard one 10-year-old on a bike say to his friend, "Don't go past the Turner's yard. That's where the ground burps when it rains." Cute. Terrifying. Accurate. That's when I discovered something else. Something even worse. I was combing through the HOA's old meeting records, back when Raymond ran the show, when I found a folder marked Long-Term Development Proposals. Inside was a 5-page PDF stamped with a Civic Edge header. The proposal? Future use development of adjacent lots in Greenway. The plan was to pave the entire back portion of the neighborhood, including the creek and a 3-acre wooded area, to make space for 10 new townhomes and a private pool facility. The HOA wasn't just ignoring nature, they were trying to erase it. The only reason the plan stalled? County zoning laws required an inactive watercourse status to develop near a creek, which of course Maplewood Glen didn't have. Until they poured concrete in it, I realized what had happened. They weren't just trying to stop water damage, they were trying to change the legal classification of the land so they could build on it. This wasn't mismanagement. This was premeditated environmental fraud. I called Eliza again. She met me at the creek with her drone. I showed her the development plan, the old invoices, the concrete, the waterlogged homes. She connected the dots instantly. "Holy hell," she said. "They tried to erase a waterway so they could sell the land." Exactly. They filled a creek, flooded homes, and then planned to profit off the chaos. That night, Eliza posted a follow-up. HOA's secret plan to build over creek exposed. Mold, fraud, and $1 million motive. Within hours, it hit every news aggregator in the state. The comments exploded. "These people should be in jail." This is why no one trusts HOAs. Environmental terrorism in a cul-de-sac. The state attorney general's office took notice. Again. Only this time, they sent people. 3 agents showed up at our next HOA meeting. Suits, badges. One held a file thick enough to break a window. "We're opening a formal investigation into Maplewood Glen's former HOA board," said the lead agent. "We'll be reviewing fraudulent contracts, environmental violations, and the obstruction of waterway protections under state conservation law." The room fell dead silent. Even the skeptical neighbors looked relieved, vindicated. Some clapped. But the biggest surprise wasn't the investigation. It was what the agents uncovered next. Civic Edge wasn't just a shady vendor. It was a shell company, registered under a fake address tied to a now-defunct strip mall. All payments had been routed through two dummy LLCs, one of which had bank ties in Nevada. Follow the money long enough and you hit oil. Or in this case, Raymond's brother, who worked in mid-level property development in Phoenix. Turns out, Raymond had been setting up this Greenway redevelopment project as a private sale to his brother's firm. The plan was to buy the land from the HOA, cheap, then build and flip townhomes for millions. They would have pulled it off if the water had stayed gone. We knew the AG's office would take months to finish their investigation. Bureaucracy moves slower than a clogged drain. But we weren't about to let the neighborhood sit in limbo. So we pushed forward, with cleanup, with repair, with redemption. We formed a restoration task force. Our goal? Return the creek, remove the mold, rebuild trust. Every Saturday, neighbors met up to help clear debris, dig new drainage paths, or deliver meals to mold-struck families. Roger coordinated crews. Janice monitored environmental reports. I wrangled donations and vendors. Even the kids got involved. They painted creek signs with wildlife on them, "Protect the frogs," and "Let the water flow," and nailed them to trees near the recovered stream bed. It became more than a fix. It became a movement. 2 months later, I got a letter from the County Board of Supervisors. They were awarding Maplewood Glen a Community Environmental Restoration Grant, $60,000 to help fund further creek recovery, floodproofing, and educational outreach. The check came with a note: "For your resilience, transparency, and refusal to back down in the face of systemic negligence. Your community is a model for what's possible." I read it out loud at the next meeting. People cried, not because of the money, but because we were finally more than just victims. We were a neighborhood again. You'd think after exposing a fraudulent HOA scheme, rebuilding a creek, and fending off black mold, we'd get a break. A victory lap. Something. But Maplewood Glen had one more surprise waiting. We were in the middle of coordinating our second volunteer cleanup when I got a call from Janice. Her voice was shaking. "You need to get down to Lot 42, now." When I arrived, a crowd had already formed. Neighbors stood in stunned silence, staring at what used to be the Turners' backyard. Only now, it looked like a swamp had opened a portal straight to hell. A sinkhole, a real gaping 6-foot-deep chasm, had collapsed beneath the Turners' back porch, swallowing half their deck and pulling down one of their support columns. Mud, tree roots, even part of their sprinkler system had disappeared into the pit. Mr. Turner, a retired Navy mechanic, stood next to it scratching his head. "Well, I guess I didn't need that back patio anyway." The crowd laughed nervously, but I didn't. I felt a familiar chill crawl up my spine. This wasn't a one-off freak incident. This was a consequence of concrete, of greed, of water with nowhere left to go. I called the county's Public Works Department immediately. 2 engineers showed up the next morning with ground-penetrating radar. What they found was worse than we feared. Due to the creek rerouting, water had saturated and destabilized several portions of land under multiple homes. The natural flow had once carved a safe, predictable channel. Now, redirected and trapped, it was slowly eating away at the soil beneath the neighborhood. Turns out even concrete can't stop water. It just delays the inevitable. Their final report included phrases like subterranean erosion, foundation undermining likely, long-term structural risk. I felt sick. That night, I sat with Lena and Roger in our garage, poring over everything we'd collected. Eliza had offered to run another exposé, but I hesitated. This story's not just HOA fraud anymore, I said. It's turning into an infrastructure crisis. If we push too hard, we tank property values. Again, Lena leaned forward. Let me ask you something. Do you care more about the number on Zillow or the fact that people's homes are literally collapsing? Roger added, we didn't come this far to start hiding things. They were right. We weren't just board members now. We were stewards of the truth. The homeowners had elected us to clean up the mess. Hiding the worst of it wouldn't just make us hypocrites. It would make us exactly like Raymond and his crew. So I picked up the phone. Eliza's third article dropped that Friday morning. Sinkhole swallows deck. Hidden erosion from illegally filled creek puts homes at risk. This time, it didn't just go viral, it exploded. Major networks picked it up. Cable news anchors debated whether HOAs should have the power to approve environmental changes. YouTubers and TikTokers created dramatic recaps with titles like When the Suburbs Collapse and Concrete Swamp Horror Story. Public pressure mounted. State senators began issuing statements. The governor's office acknowledged the issue and pledged emergency resources for neighborhood resilience programs. And the old board? They started getting subpoenas. 3 weeks after the sinkhole, Raymond was finally arrested. It wasn't flashy. No dawn raid. Just 2 plainclothes agents showing up at his brother's condo in Phoenix and escorting him out in cuffs. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit development fraud, environmental negligence. The list was long and getting longer. Greg, the man who once threatened Lena, got 5 years for impersonating law enforcement, brandishing a firearm, and participating in an unlicensed security operation. We watched their mugshots flash across the local news like a final act in a bad play. But this wasn't about vengeance anymore. This was about redemption. We took that state grant and matched it with donations. Within weeks, we had drainage experts on site, rerouting safe overflow channels and replanting native vegetation to stabilize the soil. Kids helped lay stones. Families volunteered to haul dirt and mulch. Local landscapers donated time and tools. One rainy afternoon, I watched water finally trickle back into the creek bed instead of backing into someone's garden. The sound of it, soft, deliberate, felt like closure. Roger leaned over and said, "Funny, huh? Took us destroying it to realize how important it really was." I nodded. Water always finds its way, and so do the people who care. But there was one more piece left. Remember those 10 townhomes they tried to build? The development plan Raymond had buried in the files? We voted unanimously to take the 3-acre plot and donate it to the county land trust. It would never be developed. Ever. Instead, it became Maplewood Preserve, an official green space with trails, benches, and a small learning center where kids could learn about conservation, erosion, and the dangers of ignoring nature. We had a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The sheriff's department came. The mayor sent a letter. Even Eliza showed up and filmed the whole thing for a YouTube doc. People laughed, hugged, ate cookies shaped like frogs and turtles. We didn't just fix the swamp, we honored it. By the end of the year, Maplewood Glen wasn't just back on the map, it was better than ever. Real estate values stabilized. Families felt safe again. And the HOA? We rewrote the charter from scratch, every article, every bylaw, every policy. No more secrecy, no more shortcuts, no more concrete over creeks. Just when we thought peace had finally settled over Maplewood Glen, the lawsuits started rolling in. It began with a thin envelope from a local law firm, addressed to the HOA board. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Notice of intent to file. Suit for damages. Claimant, Joanna and Mark Whitaker. Allegation, structural damages and black mold resulting from HOA negligence. And that was just the first. Over the next 2 weeks, 7 more arrived. Each one painted the same ugly picture. Cracked foundations, warped floors, compromised drywall, mold, mildew, and structural degradation. The common thread? Improper water flow and drainage, all tied back to the creek, tampering approved by Raymond and his board. We held an emergency board meeting in the clubhouse. Tom read the numbers aloud. If all 8 families file and they each win even partial judgments, we could be on the hook for over $2 million in claims. Lena folded her arms. They're not wrong. They have damage. The old board screwed them. But we've got insurance, right? Tom nodded. Yes, but not for gross negligence. And these suits name the HOA entity as a whole. In short, we, the new board, were standing on a ship built by pirates, and we were legally expected to keep it afloat while the ocean was still on fire. That night, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how we went from fixing a creek to facing lawsuits that could bankrupt the HOA and force dozens of families out of their homes. Around 3 a.m., Lena rolled over and said, "You're thinking too loud." I chuckled. How can we make this right for everyone without killing the community budget? It's not their fault. It's not ours. But someone's gotta pay. She sat up, turned on the light, and grabbed a legal pad. What if we stop thinking like board members and start thinking like veterans? I blinked. You want to launch an assault on, what, civil court? She smiled. I want to strategize. The next morning, we started what we called Operation Clean Slate. Tom drafted a formal counterclaim strategy, suing the estate of the old HOA leadership, their umbrella LLC, which, thanks to some shady documentation, still existed, and the contractor responsible for the illegal creek fill. We filed for injunctive relief and reassignment of liability. Basically, a legal request to shift blame from the HOA entity to the individuals and vendors who had orchestrated the mess in the first place. It wasn't guaranteed to work, but it bought us time. Meanwhile, Lena worked her network. She contacted Army Corps engineers, state inspectors, and even a civilian disaster relief group. By pulling some strings and emphasizing environmental negligence, we got the State Department of Environmental Protection to reopen their case file on Maplewood Glen. That changed everything, because once the DEP got involved, so did the Attorney General's office. In under a month, the entire narrative shifted. No longer was the new HOA board the target of civil wrath. We were now cooperators in a state-led investigation into residential environmental crimes and fraud. Eliza's follow-up piece hit like a thunderclap. Residents sue HOA, but new board fights back. Points to deep fraud and vendor collusion. The public turned on the former board faster than we expected. Even the angry residents softened once they saw how hard we were fighting. Not just for legal shielding, but for justice. We offered a proposal. Instead of drawn-out lawsuits, we'd establish a restoration fund, seeded with HOA reserve savings, matched by the state's Emergency Neighborhood Relief Program, and bolstered by vendor settlements. Families could submit damage claims and receive grants for repairs without suing. To our shock, 6 of the 8 families agreed. We weren't just patching roofs anymore. We were rebuilding trust. By the end of spring, nearly $600,000 in grant funds had been approved for affected homes. Contractors worked overtime. We got mold abatement teams out. We helped cover temporary housing. One family even moved back in after being gone for 6 months and brought us fresh banana bread. Janice cried when she saw her backyard dry for the first time in 2 years. But the work came at a price: burnout. We'd fought so hard for so long that most of the board was running on fumes. One evening, Tom turned to me and said, "I was a JAG lawyer in war zones, and somehow this HOA thing is worse." I laughed. "That's because bullets are more honest than bureaucracy." He smiled. True. Still, we pushed on. Because what else do you do when a community finally believes in something again? You fight for it, even when it exhausts you. And then came the developer offer. One morning, a glossy packet arrived at our HOA mailbox, addressed to the Rebuilding Board of Maplewood Glen. Inside, renderings, proposed layouts, and a check for $50,000 made out to the HOA. The proposal was simple: sell the recently preserved Maplewood Preserve back to a developer under the condition that it be used for eco-conscious smart housing. In exchange, the HOA would get a cut of profits, help with future renovations, and an endowment fund to maintain communal areas. Lena stared at the packet for a long time. "They're trying to buy us out, with good intentions this time." Tom grunted. "Yeah, well, snakes can wear suits too." We took it to the residents. We held a town hall. We laid out the facts. We told them the offer was generous, but we also reminded them what that land represented, what we had been through. Then I asked a simple question: do we want to pave over what made us strong? The vote wasn't even close. 128-9. We declined. The preserve would stay. The creek would flow. The swamp was gone, but the lessons we'd learned were etched in stone. Literally, because Lena had another idea. A new monument just outside the walking trail in the preserve. This one, made of natural river rock shaped like a ripple. Inscribed on the side, "Nature remembers. So do we." Just when we thought it was over, peace restored, lawsuits settled, water flowing, and the community whole again, the past came knocking. Or rather, the past came storming in. It started with a phone call from a private number. Lena answered. "Hello?" The voice was clipped, tense. "Mrs. Granger, this is Special Agent Elkins with the Department of Justice. We need to speak with you and your board. In person." She straightened up. "Is this about the fraud case?" "Number, this is about the contracts. And the money trail." Agent Elkins and a second DOJ agent met us in the clubhouse the next day. They spread out a series of documents on the table: federal audit sheets, emails, wire transfer logs. Lena, Tom, and I leaned in. "What are we looking at?" I asked. Elkins tapped one folder. A shell company out of Nevada, registered under an alias. It was receiving HOA funds monthly for stormwater consulting. Tom frowned. "Wait, we never had stormwater consultants." "No," Elkins confirmed, "but your former board did." "And the account receiving that money? It links back to a federal contractor blacklist." We went still. "Who?" Lena asked. "Raymond Probst," the agent said. "Your old HOA president has ties to a known contracting scam network. 2 other neighborhoods in Arizona and Texas have pending federal suits over identical setups. We believe he used this HOA as a laundering site." Lena exhaled sharply. "So it wasn't just bad decisions. It was criminal. Worse, organized criminal." That afternoon, We received a federal subpoena for all HOA documents from the past 5 years, digital and paper. Lena and I spent 2 days scanning everything. Tom coordinated with Eliza again. We handed over everything. Meanwhile, Elkin's team began investigating Civic Shield, the fake contractor Greg had owned. Their conclusion? A deliberate scheme to inflate invoices, falsify services rendered, and route HOA funds through Civic Shield into a joint account belonging to Greg and Raymond. That discovery sent shockwaves through the legal system. Raymond, who had gone underground, was placed on a federal wanted list. Greg, already facing state charges, now had a RICO case building against him. Maplewood Glen went from local drama to national headline. CNN picked up the story. Suburban Scam: How One HOA Became a Front for Contractor Corruption. But for the people of our community, the headlines were just noise. They wanted justice. They wanted closure. So we held another vote, this time to pursue civil action as a neighborhood. Every homeowner could be part of a class action suit, not against the HOA itself, but against Raymond, Greg, and Civic Shield. The vote? 134-0. No one abstained. No one voted no. People were angry. And this time they had facts and firepower on their side. We worked with a legal firm specializing in class action civil fraud. Tom acted as the liaison. Lena offered security consultations. I oversaw the archive delivery. We weren't just running the HOA anymore, we were running a war room. Meanwhile, Lena uncovered something shocking. Buried in the old HOA bylaws was a clause titled Community Authority Privilege. At first glance, it was legal fluff, but on closer inspection, it gave the HOA president discretionary power over external vendor selection without board approval. "This is how Raymond did it," she muttered. "He wrote himself a blank check." We amended it immediately. The board voted unanimously to revoke the clause and institute a new rule. All expenses over $5,000 required full community disclosure and a 7-day public review period. From that point forward, Maplewood Glen would be transparent, or it wouldn't be anything at all. The class action suit was filed in late summer. We went public with it. Press conferences, legal interviews, media tours. Eliza even arranged a segment on a popular podcast. Support poured in from other neighborhoods across the country. Emails, letters. Some HOAs were asking us to advise them on how to purge their own boards. We created a digital toolkit called HOA Reboot, a free resource with everything we'd learned: legal templates, transparency policies, fraud detection checklists. It spread fast. Our story wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reform. A few weeks later, we received the notice we'd been waiting for. U.S. v. Raymond Probst. Preliminary hearing. Scheduled. Defendant apprehended in Tucson, Arizona. Raymond had been caught. Greg, already in custody, flipped to avoid federal time. His testimony, combined with our files, became the spine of the prosecution. Lena watched the court stream on her tablet while sitting on the porch. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just said, "Took long enough." I nodded. "Still want to quit the board?" She looked at me. "Number not until the last brick he poured is ripped out." By fall, the swamp had dried, the lawsuits were almost closed, and a sense of balance had finally returned. Kids rode bikes again. The trails reopened. Neighbors held BBQs. Lena started a self-defense class for local women. Tom began mentoring high school students on civic law. I got back to woodworking in the garage, making birdhouses out of repurposed Civic Shield signposts, and every so often, Someone would pass by our place and stop. They'd shake my hand. They'd nod at Lena. Some just said, "Thanks." Not because we fixed everything, but because we fought. And because for once, someone stood up to the invisible tyrants of suburbia and said, "No more." 6 months had passed since the lawsuits, indictments, and neighborhood reformation. To an outsider, Maplewood Glen looked like any other middle-class suburb. Quiet streets, trimmed lawns, and rows of pastel-colored homes with American flags fluttering beside front doors. But beneath the calm, we had become something else. Not a war zone anymore, not a courtroom circus, but a community forged by conflict. And like any battle-scarred survivor, we needed a reminder. So we built one. It started with Lena. She was pacing our backyard one Saturday afternoon, hands on her hips, staring at the creek. "What if we left it the way it is?" she said. I followed her gaze. The once concreted death ditch had been carefully restored. Native grasses now swayed beside the restored banks. The water, once stagnant or blocked, now flowed freely. Ducks had returned. Kids sometimes skipped stones again. "I like it like this," I said. "No," she replied. "I mean, leave part of the concrete." I raised a brow. "Why?" "To remind us what was done here." We talked it over with Tom, then brought it to the board. It wasn't a hard sell. People didn't want to forget. They didn't want to pretend it never happened. They wanted a marker, a story, a warning, a symbol. So we took the largest slab of the broken HOA poured concrete, over 1,000 pounds of it, and hauled it to the community entrance. We planted it into the earth, half buried, like a grave marker. And then we commissioned an iron plaque to mount on it. It read, "Here stood a neighborhood that was nearly buried, by greed, by lies, by tyranny. But the creek still flows. And so do we." It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. And it became our monument of mud. Not long after that, the Department of Justice officially closed its investigation. Raymond Probst pled guilty in federal court to conspiracy to commit fraud and wire fraud. He was sentenced to 12 years. Greg took a plea deal, received 5 years, and agreed to pay restitution. That restitution? It was distributed across Maplewood Glen homeowners, $2,300 per household. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was proof that we weren't crazy, that we hadn't overreacted, that HOA corruption wasn't just a joke or a meme, it was real, and we beat it. News outlets revisited our story around the 1-year mark. We agreed to a follow-up interview with a national podcast called The Civil Suburbia Files. The host asked Lena one question that stuck with me. "What made you step up instead of just moving away?" She answered without missing a beat. "Because no one should be forced to abandon their home because of the people who were supposed to protect it. Because sometimes the only way out is through." That line went viral. They made t-shirts. With the notoriety came invitations, legal panels, urban development summits, even a speaking offer from a national homeowners' rights organization. We politely declined most of them. Lena hated the attention. Tom preferred working behind the scenes. And I was tired. But we accepted one offer. A partnership with a nonprofit that helped other neighborhoods escape abusive HOA boards. We started an initiative called Creek Watch, a coalition to expose fraudulent, illegal, or dangerous HOA practices across the country. In our first 3 months, we helped 6 neighborhoods file suit. 2 removed their boards entirely. 1 uncovered embezzlement worse than ours. It felt good to fight again, but not alone this time. Back at home, peace became routine. We held monthly board meetings under string lights in the park pavilion instead of sterile offices. Kids played while adults voted. We shared chili recipes and HOA policy changes in the same breath. No secrets, no surprises, no patrols, and most importantly, no more concrete. Every now and then, a new family would move in. They'd ask about the monument. I'd point at it and say, that's what happens when the wrong people are given too much power. Then I'd pause and add, and that's what happens when the right people fight back. One morning, I walked down to the creek with a mug of coffee. The fog was rising off the water, and a blue heron stood perfectly still on a rock, staring back at me. Behind me, the monument stood tall. It looked ancient, heavy, permanent. But the creek moved like it had somewhere to be. And in that moment, I realized, so did I. Not away, not out, but forward. Because some homes are built from drywall and lumber, but others, they're built from mud, fire, and iron.